last time we were looking at the subject of nativism, and I'll put it up here. And can anybody remember what it meant? What nativism meant? Roughly. Anybody want to answer?
Is it origin of birth? That's my understanding of nativism.
Origin of birth. So flesh it out a bit. What does that look like practically?
White supremacy.
Okay, so Richard's saying white supremacy, which is a good, I suppose it's a good, in the context of American policies or politics on immigration, it looks like white supremacy. I don't think it's always white supremacy, but in this context it was white supremacy. So Debray referred to, what did you say, Debray? Origin of birth?
Yeah.
So, yeah, well...
So I didn't realise you were looking at it for a specific context.
Yeah, we're speaking clearer. Can we have the thing back or whatever it is, Tom? I don't know what you call it, so our names don't keep popping up on the screen.
Oh, yeah, pin speaker. Do I have to do that from this side?
I was just referring to the last presentation, so this might be a different context that she's using the word native in. So
I just had the pin on.
I was just referring to the last presentation. Immigration. The context is immigration.
Yeah.
Hello.
Okay, sorry, I think I've done it. Is it?
Yeah. Do you need to
Spotlight.
spotlight it, not pin it? It looks like it's spotlighted.
Yeah, I just did it. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
That's good. I just want to get rid of that.
We're still taking input to your question.
Yes. Yeah. Nativism. What does that mean?
So the nativism is about
Are you speaking, Tom? Sorry, I think it's cut out.
yeah. Sorry, can you hear me?
Okay, we can now. Okay.
Yeah, nativism is about kind of assigning a. It's a bit like. Sorry, I had the answer. I had an input well phrased, and then I think the whole spotlight thing's put on. Yeah, it's about having a kind of sort of like segregation. So in the context of the United States, kind of maintaining this pure race or maybe even religions, this supremacy based on the birth of. Sorry, I've got so confused. I'll come back to you in a minute.
No problem. I know. I think it's made perhaps more complex than we think. So, if we break it down, a native. If we say we're native to some country, it means we're born there. So I'm a native of England, or you're a native of Jamaica.
Be relevant.
Sorry, what was it?
I've got it now.
Go on then.
I've got it now. It's kind of nationalism based on your birth rather than because you looked at those national or constitutional nationalism, which is a good thing, which is a contrast to this one.
Yes.
So that is you're a citizen or you're part of the society based on adherence to the principles of the Constitution, regardless of your background or your demographic. Whereas nativism is more purely about your birth and your heritage and what you look like, rather than adherence to the set of principles.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was a good summary. Basically, it's saying that this contrast between how someone identifies as from that country. So we were talking in specifics of America, but it's like saying it's promoting the interests of one group of people really over another in a country. So it is a form of nationalism, and we discussed a little bit about nationalism in itself, wanting to defend your nation, wanting your nation to be great or your nation to have to be wealthy, prosperous, is probably at the root of every nation. But this is specifically, nativism is the political policy of promoting the interests of the native inhabitants against those of immigrants. So it's a political policy, basically. Although people who believe that policy don't really call it nativism, of promoting the interests of those who are born there, of the native inhabitants. Political policy of promoting interest of native inhabitants versus immigrants. Now, if we looked at that, we looked at it in terms of America, but if we look at that in terms of any country of the world, so let's just use France as an example. The French are probably going to promote the interests of the French over, say, maybe Polish people that come in as immigrant workers. And I think most countries would promote the interests of their own kind, whatever that looks, how we define that, to protect the nation at large, because every people group just wants to preserve their family. And we looked at this as well: preserve their family, preserve their nation, because everybody's got a fear deep down of perhaps being uprooted or overtaken, or that their interests are going to be in conflict with the other people's, whoever they are. But what that looks like in America isn't really true. It's promoting the interest of native inhabitants, who they're saying are white Europeans, versus immigrants. But a black family can come here 100, 200 years before, say, our century, our time, and they're still not considered native inhabitants in that sense on the level of the white people. So this is racially charged, and it is charged against every immigrant, but specifically black people. But it's the Poles, the lesser Europeans, so-called, or anybody that's not white Northern European. That's how this policy was implemented in America, and we saw that down through the history of America. So it became, as Richard said, white supremacy. And if we go on, if we really
No, you go on. Yes, I've got a question after.
And if we really looked at this whole thing about native inhabitants, we'd say, well, the native Indians should have been the ones that were promoting their interests, and not the white people who came afterwards, because the whites themselves were immigrants. So we can see the contradictions in this mindset, that they're not really natives themselves. The white Europeans, they've come and settled there, and they've taken over from the Indians, who were the native inhabitants. So the way this is used is as a political weapon to justify white supremacy in terms of America, and that's what we saw. Go on, Debbie.
Yeah, I've got a question. What's the difference between nationalism or patriotism then in that regard?
So nationalism is very similar. Patriotism is the idea of supporting one's country and culture, which is nationalism as well, in that sense, defending the nation. And you're a patriot of that nation, you're patriotic, you support your country and your nation. It's a devotion and a rigorous support for one's country, because we looked at that a little bit as well. So it's very similar to nationalism. And nationalism is slightly different from nativism, because nationalism could be everybody. Immigrants could feel very passionate about America as well. A Chinese person who's lived in America can say, I'm American and I want to defend America. So it's defending your nation. And I think we touched on the fact A.T. Jones writes a book called Christian Patriotism, and says that the two don't really go hand in hand, because your first interest is to defend the spiritual kingdom. It's not to defend your physical kingdom over someone else's physical kingdom. That's not necessarily a war we should be getting into. But that's another topic, I suppose. But yeah, patriotism, nationalism, very similar to nativism, and could be seen as not necessarily a bad thing, that each nation is protecting its own interests. So when you say you have the United Nations meeting, each nation is there to defend its corner in that sense. So so that no country gets put down in one way, and everybody works together to build the earth. But the reality is that we protect our own corner. And that's what happens on every level. We protect our family, we protect our community, our village, and it just extends out. And that in itself may not be wrong, because everybody has that perhaps motivation to do the best they can for themselves. And I suppose at the root of that is selfishness, and we're in a sinful world, so the model breaks down because people aren't looking out for other people. And this is the thing about nativism. It's this support of, that would be one thing if you're supporting the interests of native inhabitants, because promoting the nation, but it includes the idea that you're going to be against another group of people, that you're actually going to not be positive towards other people, which is not nice, basically. So, Leanne, did you have a point?
To the man.
Okay. So at the back of that, so we had this line, and we saw how basically American policies or politics has always promoted the interests of the white Northern European in America, and it's been there from the beginning, and it's still there. But it's taken on, but it's very much associated with Christianity, and this is where the problem comes in. So now you've got white, so in US terms, you have white, Northern European, as opposed to, say, Polish or Czech or, the Southern European countries. White, Northern European, English-speaking, and Christian, or what we term Protestant. And the problem with that in general terms is that so some of that is all mixed up. So we have the Pilgrim Fathers go, and they're going to get away from religious persecution, so they're going for religious grounds perhaps, they want a better life. Other people are now going for this pursuit of happiness because they want to be wealthy. People want to build up their own kingdom. And so you could say that's equally kind of, well, it's not selfish. You could say Christian reasons were unselfish. They want to promote Christianity and Christian living and Christian principles. So the root of that is good, to get away from papal and supremacy and the monarchy in Europe. So on one level, there's this mixture of it being positive but negative. So the negativity is you're trying to force other people to go a certain way, to be Christian, and you can't force because God doesn't use force. And then at the same time, you've got this people going for, because they want to build up economically, they want to be rich, they want to have the opportunity, a piece of the American pie, that whole kind of mindset of going somewhere where you can better yourself and do better. And that may not even be wrong in itself either, but so often these things get twisted and distorted. And I was reflecting on that in terms of what was happening this week as well in the British press. So I don't know if people are aware that Oxford University has been in the press this week. Does anybody know why? And to do with this whole idea of race.
Was it about the picture of the Queen in the Commons room? Is that the one?
That was one thing, but the specific argument... Yeah, no, that's it's totally linked in the sense that there was one college at Oxford. I don't know if people know that Oxford University is split into colleges. So they have different residential colleges where you get taught different subjects, and they label these colleges like Magdal College. But they have about, I don't know how many, I'm going to guess about 14 maybe or something like that, colleges. And one of these colleges had removed the picture of the Queen, as you say, from the wall because they felt it was...
One is called Wycliffe as well.
Wycliffe, yeah. So these colleges are named after various people, and I'm not sure about the Queen story, but it's connected to this story. But this argument this week was about a statue of Cecil Rhodes. I don't know if people are familiar with that. So this Oriel College at Oxford has a statue as you go in. Over the door, it says Oriel College and his name Cecil Rhodes, and then above that is, I don't know, it's probably a more than life-size stone statue of Cecil Rhodes. And some of the students have been campaigning to remove him from there, and the reason is because of his association with the slave trade. And so it's on the backlash of the Black Lives Matter in 2015 when they tried to also remove, when he was removed, I think, a statue of someone else. So I was looking at this week thinking this is all connected to this. So this is connected to the subject of colonialism and imperialism, and we've probably heard these terms if we've done any history at school. And I'm going to keep some of us on track because some people don't like history and might go to sleep here. But these are useful terms to know in terms of this whole racial discussion. So colonialism, what is colonialism? Does anyone give me an idea of what they think it is? Colonialism. Well, it's connected to colonization, colonizing a country, and what that means is basically people going to live there. So when somebody goes to another country to live there and grow that community, they're colonizing that country. So it's like an ant colony. They're taking over that area, and and what that looks like is, it may be different. So some people may say the Pilgrim Fathers, they went and they colonized America, but equally you could have a war zone and a battle could come in and an army attack and then colonize it. So there's different ways to overtake a nation. It could be peaceful, it could be war, it could be not peaceful, and it could be positive or negative. So there's huge arguments about colonization, whether it was positive or negative. Most people, I think, would see it, I don't know how people see it. Do people see the whole concept of colonialism as positive or negative?
A bit of both, positive and negative.
Right, so this is speaking from someone who's, so hi Cedri, so someone who's lived in Zimbabwe where there was British colonisation. And so give me an example of what would be positive and what would be negative.
Well, our education, because I don't know any other, was of a good standard, but then they divided the races, and they gave like they had the white people, the mixed race people, and the black people, and gave the black people not good education. So in that respect, there's a lot of things that were unequal.
So negative and positive. Okay, so this was So let's say promoted inequality. So that was basically, again, white supremacy, you could say, because they got a better education.
Yes.
And so education's a positive side of it, perhaps. So people got, and knowledge is power, so people get education. Anything else that could be negative? Sorry, who said that?
Now, how's
Did you finish?
Yeah, no, anybody. Yeah, CG or whoever.
I'll let CG finish and then I'll chip in.
Okay, did you finish, CG?
there was the education, there was the housing, there was
Housing.
um,
So it was better.
what do you call it?
Oh, medicine. Yeah,
Medicine.
medicine.
Yeah, for the people that was again unequal.
Mhm. Okay, so this is all for the white people. So that's positive. So are those people that actually moved there as well? So they are immigrants. Well, they're again, it's similar to how they colonized America. So the white Europeans or the white race gets treated better than the black race.
The Irish Catholics were white, but they never got to enter into the privileges of the white supremacists.
Right, so in each country it looks different. So I suppose with Africa, we're talking about Europeans going there and settling, and then having these privileges, I suppose, or the benefits of bringing this. Now, if we look in terms of colonization, and the thing is, this explodes around 1600s, and the Pilgrim Fathers go, we've got from 16, 17, 1800s. Yes. Sorry, you made a point. Sorry. Yes, carry on.
I think my take on colonization is it's not good. There are positives that come to it, but that doesn't make it good, because those positives don't have to come only from colonization. So when we talk about education, housing, medicine, the places which have developed those things without any colonization. So you look at places like China, for example, which wasn't colonized, and it developed a lot of those good things. And I find that a lot of the places where there have been colonies or that they've been colonized, as much as they have these things, they're actually quite behind, and there's this legacy of inferiority. So if you go to somewhere like Kenya, you look at white people, even there people still look at white people as
superior,
so much higher. So as I was watching this video, there's a white guy in a hotel, he was actually in Uganda, and he was going around and abusing one of the members of staff there, and was even slapping him and doing all these things, but the member of staff couldn't retaliate, couldn't even defend himself, because if he did anything to the white person, there'll just be
repercussion.
a lot of repercussions. He'll be kicked out, he'll be fired or whatever, so there's white people still have a lot of power in these places where it's where they're colonies, and they're still in a sense that there's still a lot of inequality there because of the colonial rules. So the colonial rule would come and set up a lot of inequality, which is perpetuated by the governments in that sense. So I think you can get education and all the benefits without colonization, and maybe it was supposed to be a mission rather than a colonization. So you go and you spread the gospel, things like that, or you could teach these things, spread the benefits without actually making a country a colony in the same way.
And this is an interesting point, which is leading where it's going, where I'm going with this. Well, one aspect of it is, you mentioned mission. And this colonization, if we look at the Pilgrim Fathers, we see the religious roots of them going to America. We understand they're escaping the tyranny of the papacy, and that was their motivation. So there is definitely religious reasons why they're doing that. And then as we go down from 16, 17, 1800s, we see this colonization going hand in hand with mission, like you say. So you've got white Christians who are going to these African countries, many of them with genuine motives. You've got Hudson Taylor, you have these famous missionaries that we know that sacrificed a huge amount to go and share the gospel, what they understood as the gospel, but it's so tied up with people going there for business interests. So the reason they go to Africa and India is because these countries are rich in natural resources. So with Africa, what we see is diamonds and gold. And once that's found out, then there's this huge gold rush. The gold rush was America as well, but people go there for natural resources, for economic reasons. So you've got religious reasons, and you've got economic reasons, and they're tied together, and this is the problem. So now it's all mixed up with white supremacy and with the white man going over there to civilize the black nations or to share the gospel, some of them with real genuine motives, but people with not genuine motives as well, because you get that controversy of who's going and why they're going. But many of these people, and the reason I was looking at this is because of this whole Cecil Rhodes controversy with this statue. So you look at Cecil Rhodes, and Cecil Rhodes goes and he makes his money. Let me just read to you about him. So the other word I wanted to, just before we go to him, is imperialism, which is very similar to colonization. And so the definition of colonization is the practice of domination, which involves the subjugation of one people to another, and that's the problem with colonialism. So it is...
But Emma, can I add something?
Yes, carry on, yeah.
No, it's nothing like, it's just to add to your point, because when we were speaking about colonization, you know, it was mentioned it was just people coming and settling there, but I think what makes colonization so I don't know if I'm running ahead.
No, carry on, that's fine.
What makes colonization so bad in my eyes is that you're going there to actually establish political and economic control. So you're not going there to settle and, you know, I want to live here, I want my children to live here. It's like we're going here to take over, basically.
Right.
And I think that's what makes it, as you said, the diamonds, you know, the economic, like, it becomes bad for those reasons. And the only way you can establish political control is by, like you said, like, dominating the people that are there already.
Right.
And I think that's what makes it bad.
And it involves the subjugation of one people to another.
Yeah.
And that's...
And also, I mean, you know, when the missionaries went over there, they looked at as black people as savages, like they weren't civilized. And they treated them in that way, you know, and they could only be civilized once they started to think like they do, behave like they do, dress like they do, eat like they do. So they did a lot of damage to.
Absolutely, and I think that's what happened with a lot of missionaries, but not all of them. So you see someone like Hudson Taylor goes, he becomes Chinese, he dresses Chinese, he wants to reach the people where they are. He wants to minister to the people. He doesn't want to have some dominion and some control over them. He wants to genuinely share the gospel. Well, that's the story I know about him. I mean, obviously history may have been distorted with some of these things, but he has that battle with the established mission organisation there, who say, you know, why do you even want to go there? You know, if God wants to reach them, he'll do it himself. You don't need to go as a missionary. Then when he gets there, it's like, why do you want to dress like a Chinese? Because they've got their colonial culture that they're keeping. The whites stick with the whites, and they're not really there to spread the gospel. But so you have got that, but I think there are genuine missionaries as well. But this is the key to it, as you were saying, and Daisy was saying, that this is about the subjugation of one people to another, and that's the problem with it. And then imperialism is a policy of extending a country's power and influence through colonization by the use of military force or other means. So we might actually call imperialism, so let's put that down. So that's a policy of extending a country's power through colonization. So this is a policy of extending. What does that look like today? What would we call it?
Dictatorship?
Is it? Policy could do, but the policy of extending, but it's this idea of, because you have dictatorship in one country, but a policy of extending a country's power and influence through colonization. How do, how does Putin today extend his power and influence?
Sphere of influence?
Sphere of influences. So it's a very similar idea. We wouldn't call it imperialism, we'd call it sphere of influences now, because we're not doing it through colonization. So Russians aren't going to Russia, to other country. Well, they are through military force, perhaps. Well, I guess that's the main way we're doing it. So now we've changed power and influence through colonization. So that colonization now doesn't look like someone to go and live there and taking over. It looks like armies. So it's warfare by the use of military force. I think we're doing military force instead
lying and killing.
Military force instead of immigration now. So you don't see lots of Russians migrating to Ukraine. What they're doing is using military force to subjugate it. Yes.
On this point, is this something what God does?
So now Leon's making the point. He's saying, on this point, is this something God does? Sorry, somebody speaking.
Sorry, I couldn't hear Leon. Did Leon make a point?
Yeah, Leon.
Emma's going to repeat the point.
So Leon said, is this something God does? Would you like to answer your own question?
No,
Give you the mic. No.
I want you to.
You want me to answer the question?
I think
So I'll throw that to the congregation, to the rest of us to think about. Is this something God does? So
Are you talking about a sphere of influence?
I'm talking about this practice
Yeah.
of extending a country's influence through colonization or use of military force. I'm going to put, colonization.
If you take out the military force, the power and influence.
Through colonization.
Is that the right answer? Like, that's what happened with the land of Canaan.
So Daisy,
I
what's
don't
that?
think so.
Daisy wants to make a point. Go on.
No, I was going to say, it wasn't, I could be wrong, but didn't that kind of happen with the land of Canaan? Wasn't that the whole point? They were meant to go in there and drive them out.
Isn't
Was
this
that slightly different?
Isn't this the whole Old Testament history?
Is that more genocide or?
Yeah, that more genocide is even worse. Go on.
Military.
Military force.
I think
Go on.
Does it mean creating?
I think
Sorry, just Tom, finish your point, then Debbie, we'll come back to you. Brother Tom?
yeah. I think God uses a mission style, right? And I think it's a contrast between God and the counterfeit, where God uses the mission style and the mission, and Satan uses colonization. So that's why you had some people who were going to do God's work and they did mission, and then other people went to do Satan's work, and that was colonization, they looked similar, but they were two very different in principle, effect on the locals, and benefit to the people going.
Right.
So just a quick one on the previous thing, when you talked about spheres of influence and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
It just reminded me, I was speaking to Daisy about it's not Russia, it's China. So basically in Kenya, the Chinese have come and done certain deals to build certain infrastructure there. So they built like a railway, built one or two things, the highways and whatever. But the cost of that is so extortionate that basically Kenya is going to be enslaved to the Chinese. So in the sense that the amount they're going to have to pay back will be so much that they can't afford to do it. So they've started to do things like they have to give up the port system to China to handle. So that means all the money that comes in from the port system, a lot of it is now going to China because of this deal that happened with the railway. And as time goes on, there's more interest and more things like that. We're going to have to give up more of our, Kenya will have to give more of its infrastructure, its freedom, its ability. It'll have to give up certain things to China, and that even on a political level. So that when we talk about the spheres of influence, it doesn't look like colonization, but it more or less is. Everyone understands on the ground that we're kind of like at China's behest. We have to do what China wants because. But the same thing for some countries will do what the US wants because they're reliant on things like aid as well. They're reliant on the aid, but that it comes at a cost of bending to the power that bees will. So it's almost like indirect. It's indirect colonization because they're not actually occupying. They're not in the land. They don't come and take over the land, but still controlling the land. They still get the benefits of the resources, like going to Afghanistan and all those. I remember the whole Iraq war. I was just so confused about that. Like this person has done something, and you're going after somebody else, and then you're going to the oil fields. Like, why would you do that? And that is a form of colonization, and it's masked as we're coming to do your benefit. We're helping you with terrorists. We're making these people look really bad, when actually they might not be as bad as people. So there still is that colonization, but it just looks a bit different.
Exactly. And
But they also taking over people's rights because if you have anything against the Chinese, this is what I read about in Zambia, they're doing you wrong. You can't take them to court. There's a lot of things you can't do. If a Chinese woman is going out with a black man, they'll literally kill the black man, and so it's like, even though
What
it's
fellow blacks will
the way
kill?
they do
Also.
it. They're in the country, but they also have rights as Chinese because of what the government has procured from them.
And at the root of that, what I'm hearing you saying is that it's about money, basically. So if someone can, and this is something, it says that there's religious and economic reasons. So from what Brother Tom was saying, they look very similar. So we've got people going on missions, we've got people colonizing, and the colonizers are going there to benefit themselves, to make money, to make economic progress and success. And the true religious people, I say true Christians, are going there on a mission to sacrifice themselves to help, to genuinely help the people. So what I started seeing when I looked up this Cecil Rhodes,
Sister Emma,
yes.
the chef has his hands up.
Oh, sorry, I'm not. Go on, carry on. I'm not looking at the chat. Yes.
Hi, good morning.
Brother Chef, good morning.
I was very interested in that previous question, and I think Tom actually answered it quite well. The difference with how God does it and how Satan does it. Satan started with colonization and then imperialism, and we see that he's modifying his stance every time a country tries to rule. First, he had an occupation force. Then, through imperialism, they limited their occupation force, but they said they're helping the government. And then now it's basically being done through the International Monetary Fund, mostly. Being from Jamaica and, coming from colony under English rule, to see the changes that happened once we got more and more involved with United States rule through the International Monetary Fund. I've actually seen how our economy has been destroyed. Now Jamaica is under the influence of China. Just like Kenya, they came in, they built a whole bunch of infrastructure, and the Chinese have almost full control of how the economy is running in Jamaica. A lot of money comes out, not a lot of money goes in. However, with God and how he did it with Israel, Israel had a choice. We look at the other countries that Israel was told to destroy. Sister Daisy used the word genocide. But if we take a really good look at it, we realize that all those countries were given a period of probation first. They were given a choice. Whereas through colonization and imperialism, and even through the IMF, how it's done, there is no choice. It is, you will accept this deal because it's good for you. We're being told what's good for us. We don't have that choice. God gave us the choice. God gave the Amalekites the choice, and whatever the sites are, Israelites, Amalekites, Perizzites, Hittites, they all had choices. And after their period of probation was over, God said, that's it. So the difference is, even though there was a step in and control, before that happened, these people were introduced to God. There were always symbols of God left around through Abraham and his travels, and they had that choice. They rejected that choice. Therefore, they had to be removed for the growth of God's people. The way in which Satan does it, the first thing that is taken away is your choice.
Hi, Brother Chap. But if you consider that they are given a choice and that God is telling them, here's the gospel, here's what the way I'd like you to live, etc., etc. It's essentially, okay, here's this choice, but is it really a choice for him? These Amalekites and whatnot during this period of probation. I'm giving you this time to learn who I am. And if you reject that and decide, okay, you don't like that, then I'm going to bring these people and kill you. So
Limited choice.
It's a choice, but I know it is a choice, and I get the overarching point, but on the surface, it doesn't seem like much of a choice.
Okay, I want to move from that question. I know it's a valid question. I wasn't going down there specifically, except to show that there is a link between how we see the Bible and how we see that history. So we might come back to it in a minute. But yes, it seems like if you don't do that, it's almost convert or die. Almost. And we'd say that was negative because that's force. But if we look at someone like Hudson Taylor, let's just keep it at that level of, he goes there to serve. He doesn't go there to take over, to force anyone. If they don't want him, missionaries went and they died. They were killed. They didn't stop. They didn't fight. They didn't take arms up. If someone didn't want to know and they were that ruthless, they would just kill them and they'd let them be killed. So true, genuine missionaries go in to give the people a choice. If the people don't want it, they don't force them. They're not there to take over. They're not there to do that. But the problem is, it's all wrapped up with this background as well. And even this, some people probably maybe even went there to help the people there and to share the resources. But what ends up happening is that then they want to basically, what's the word when you take the resources. They want to take all the resources of that country and make them their own because people want to build wealth. So it ends up being this thing over greed. So greed is at the back of a lot of these arguments. And I think when I looked at this history of Cecil Rhodes, basically, I'll just read this week's news on it. It said, students at Oxford University have been calling for the statue to be removed since 2015, with renewed interest coming in the wake of the removal of Edward Colston during Black Lives Matter protests in Bristol. So there's these Black Lives Matter protests in Bristol to remove this statue of Edward Colston. And when we look at his history, I just wanted to touch on that slightly because I think it all links into this, that his statue was erected in 1895 to commemorate his philanthropy. And for those who, another big word, philanthropy, for those who perhaps don't know, is basically where we give wealth to people. So we help people out. He gave a huge amount of his wealth to help different causes. I think he gave away something like 70% of it. Say he had something like 70,000 and 100,000. He gave 100,000 to his family. He almost gave the same amount to his family as he did away. So 70,000 he gave away. So he was hugely generous in sharing his wealth with people. The problem was a significant proportion of Colston's wealth came from investments in slave trading, sugar and other slave-produced goods. So he was known for, trading in people, basically, as well as other goods. And it's linked to the question, last week we saw a presentation on racism by another group, and it was generating the questions, why were people racist? Why did they do this treatment to people? Why did they? And I think it was in an effort to understand the mindset of the people back then, that this wasn't necessarily done as, I don't want to justify racism, but it's understanding the motive of people behind the scenes. And a lot of the motives were build up businesses, economic reasons, religious reasons. There were different reasons why people were involved in this thing. And that's not to justify slavery in any way, shape or form, but the culture of the day was that this was acceptable on a level. And just like in the culture of Israel, it was acceptable to have a slave, or even in times of Paul in the New Testament, it was acceptable to have a slave. That's what everybody did. So I don't want to justify it in any way, shape or form today, but it's understanding the mindset of people back then was, we're here to build up business interests, we're here to do, also to benefit people, and even if it was your own race over someone else's race, which is what it was. But it's understanding the motives of some of these people. I think that's to say that they're not these wicked racists. Deep down it is racism and it's systemic, but I think they're just like us. I think I want us to see how we're just as bad or just as good, but we like to moralise it, and we like to make them to be like these ruthless, wicked people. And I think that's perhaps an imbalanced picture of how it looked back then. These people were revered. These people were business people. These people were, different motivations for why they did things. But it doesn't make it right, and it was, it was terrible what they did. But in our eyes now, looking at it from our perspective, we're seeing how bad it was, because we're seeing the depths of this problem in a way that I don't think we've seen as Christians before on our own experience. So to go back to him, he became Prime Minister eventually, this Edward Colston, and during his time as Prime Minister, he used his political power to take away land from black Africans through a certain act that he passed, while also tripling the wealth requirement for voting under the Franchise and Ballot Act. So he said to vote you have to have a certain amount of wealth, which effectively barred black people from taking part in elections. So he did very similar to what they're doing in America right now, with trying to limit the voting power of the black race. So yes, he was extremely racist. After overseeing the formation of Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe and Zambia, during the early 1890s, he was forced to resign in 1896 after his involvement in the Jameson Raid, which was a failed attempt to inspire an uprising of British workers against Paul Kruger's South African Republic. And so what that means, in simple terms, is he's a white British man who's gone over there for business reasons, economically, to make his fortune. Then he becomes this Prime Minister of that certain region, and there, south of that, in South Africa, there were the Boers. And the Boers, there was this war going on between the Boers and the British, and the Boers were Afrikaans, were descendants of original Dutch settlers from southern Africa. And they lived in peace until 1867, when they discovered diamonds and gold in that region, and that led to war between the British and the Boers, and basically the Dutch origin settlers. So these are white people fighting white people now in Africa over diamonds and gold. and he's involved in this controversy between the British on the British side and the Boers, and that's what got him out of office eventually. Then he died soon after. So his the reason for removing this statue goes back to his anti-black policies and how racist he was. And so in the light of today, with Black Lives Matter, people are calling for him to be taken down, and quite rightly so in our time period, I would say, in some ways, although I don't think our cause is a political one. But the reason they're asking for him to be brought down is because of his stand against black people, and then it's linked now to this man, Cecil Rhodes. And Cecil Rhodes is known for his making money in diamonds. He basically goes to sorry, I've got another article about him somewhere here. He goes to South Africa to make money in diamonds, basically, and he, again, was involved heavily in the slave trade, so this is why they're asking for him to be removed. And I just thought it was very interesting that at the root of this is economic reasons, and so a lot of the time when people are going in to take over these countries, it's not, the primary reason isn't to subjugate the race there for the sake of that, for this racist reasons. It's because it's all rooted in greed and money, and they don't care about the people, they just want the resources. So we strip these countries of their resources, and in the process of doing that, some of these missionaries go and they do this. So when you look up Cecil Rhodes, he's really, it's really bad what he did with the slaves, but at the same time they said, what's the positive side of colonization? Because he goes to colonize South Africa, and they said, and then I thought, what could possibly be the positive reason for this? Because I've got a definitely negative view of colonization and imperialism, and what we did to Africa and India was terrible, and the whole white supremacy thing is really negative. And then I started thinking, well, how could they justify this treatment? And this came up last week with racism. How could they justify doing this to people? And their justification is because they're doing good things economically. So they go and they build it's what Tom just said, they build the railways and the roads. So the infrastructure is built up, which leads to increased business potential. So then businesses flourish, so the economic wealth goes up. And as you say, schools, as Cedric mentioned, education and medicine. And the missionaries, many of the missionaries were doctors. So they brought medical practices which save lives. So that meant the lengthening of the lives of the people. If they ministered to the black people in that area, they got longevity, and they got better options for education because missions started schools. So there was a lot of positivity that came out of that, and that's what they kind of put at Cecil Rhodes's feet, as it were, or Edward Colston, is the fact that he's given loads of money for these things to be started, to be done. And so out of all that there comes some positivity, but it's built on as Tom said as well, it's built on the backs of the poor people that lived there, so that they were treated really badly. Some of the people that had to do these things, it was slavery. Basically, they used the current population to build the roads and to do the schools and the hard labour. Go on.
So you're saying, is there a negative motive behind all those good works?
I'm not even saying a negative motive. There is a negative motive, but the negative motive isn't primarily perhaps to treat the people there badly. It was economic reasons. It's greed at the heart of it, that they want stuff out of this country for themselves. So they're going there to...
That's the motive.
To build wealth, yes. And perhaps the primary motive wasn't... We're not setting out to go there to be wicked to black people. And I think I was seeing it more as what does that look like for them? Why are they doing this? It's not like completely vindictive. It's just, it's selfishness. It's the sinful condition that we all want the wealth. We all want the money. Everybody wants to go and better themselves. Everybody wants to earn more money. Why do they want to do that? Putin. Something. Why does Putin want all this power? Why does he want a sphere of influence in Afghanistan? Why does he care about Afghanistan? Why does he care about... But he cares about the natural resources. And this is coming out of Debbie's presentation this morning. Why does he care about Syria? Because of the pipeline, because of the gas, because of the money. Because when he has money, he can build a bigger house, so it does affect him personally. Because I'm thinking, why are people bothered if it doesn't affect them personally? But what affects them is the fact that now they can have riches, money and power. Obviously some people do want power anyway, they want domination over people, and that's a motive in itself for some people. But for a lot of people, I think they want economic prosperity, and who doesn't want that? So then we measure positive effects by economic prosperity. So that was a positive effect, we'd say. But we would say in the movement that wasn't positive, because it was built on the backs of these poor black people, or Africans or Indians or whoever, to build all that. They suffered greatly in that process, And then, as Cedric pointed out, the ones that ended up benefiting from these things were the whites, not the indigenous people themselves many times. And so that's what the negative, the whole negativity of it is, that we're seeing now, that this is just, is all negative, because it's basically putting down your fellow man instead of serving him. It's this self-serving instead of serving others. It's the force instead of the choice. It's the whole principle behind this thing. But if we can understand, I think we're trying to understand it because we want to understand why Protestant America today is where it's at. And if we can understand our history, all of us, is this desire to benefit ourselves, is to further promote our own interests, is to grow our own business. And that's a God-given drive in each person to achieve, to use their talents. You know, we've got the parable of the talents. I gave you 5, you made 5 more. You know, we see that as positive. And so, but and even economically, that's positive. He made more money. You know, we say someone's a successful businessman because they've got lots of money. You know, the whole way we define success is economic wealth and prosperity, and every country is striving after that. We have the whole grading, the third world, the first world, you know, and all that is rooted in the principle that God says, I'll bless you. It's rooted in Bible history, the fact that he wants to make the nation prosperous, physically as well as spiritually. And this nature of the kingdom is all wrapped up with physical and spiritual prosperity, and that's in our psyche. And I think that's what we've got to see from this whole idea of white supremacy and how ugly and horrible it looks, because it's racist and sexist and inequality. But Satan's clever, so tied up with all that is all this as well, is this economic and desire to protect your own. And some of these things are God-given. And even we could say, when Leon asked that question, God's programmed us in the Old Testament to believe that we are elite, that we deserve this supremacy as Christians, that Israelites were the best. You know, the fact that we put down other nations, we're going to take over, we're better than them, is in the mind of the disciples when they get to Christ's time, that they know we are superior to the Gentiles, because it's all in there. And all this history reflects biblical Christianity in many ways, and now we're catching up with that, going, wait a minute, actually this Bible is a bit sexist and a bit racist. How do we deal with that? And then we get to the 1800s and the slavery arguments in America, and we go, wait a minute, they're using the Bible on both sides. How can that be? It's incongruous to think you could defend slavery with the Bible. But when we see all this and understand more of that history, we think, well, actually, kind of God did that, didn't he? And it goes back to Curtis's question: how do we see that?
Matt, just a quick time check. You have half an hour.
Okay, so.
But don't you think, Emma, that colonization and religion went together?
Yes.
Like when Cecil John Rhodes first went to Zimbabwe, he went there with the Jesuits. So they obviously had intentions of somehow colonizing their religion in that country too.
Right. So I suppose what we're seeing now is these principles at the back of these religions. So he's Jesuit, and we'd say automatically that's all negative because it's Catholicism. But when we see the Protestants escaping from that stronghold of the papacy in Europe, we see them coming to America, but holding on to some of those principles that the Catholics had of oppression, and how they're going to religious liberty. How do we see religious liberty? What does it look like? What does it look like for Christians to be in the government? How are they going to run this government? And this is the whole argument now, isn't it, with the Constitution, is this separation of church and state at the root of all this, because they have been so enmeshed through history. That's what you're saying. It goes with religion. They're going there, some of them for genuine religious motives, but economic ones as well, to have a new, better life. And it's all mixed together. And so that's what it looks like to be a Christian, is the Job picture, is successful, prosperous economically. So let's go to America, start our own farm, build our empire, build our wealth, and look after each other. If we're Christian, we're going to look after each other. We'll look after the poor and the needy and do those things. So it should have been positive. It should have been the glorious land. But what you've got is the track of error with the track of truth. So now Satan comes in with people who are not converted, and the whole thing is going to, you've got wheat and tares, and you've got this truth and error running side by side all the time. So, and it's very close. So it's not wrong to want to build wealth. Is it wrong? I think we've thought it was, because we've kind of categorized certain things and moralized them and said, you can't have wealth, you can't have a career. You know, the whole way we have approached Christianity, we're trying to separate that truth and that error, and perhaps we've done it badly, I guess, or we've made mistakes in that. So now we're trying to readjust it, say, actually, what does God look like? What does he want? How does it look to have a Christian nation? You know, that all these Christians go to America and try to make a glorious land, and it fails. Why is it failing? What's failing about it? How do we get someone like Trump in, who's got supposedly Christian values, but it's all going wrong? Go on.
Just thinking of the thought just came to mind, which perhaps sheds light on a question that I asked actually, and this duality of colonialization with religion could be a result of, just like how we've looked at slavery and how the slave masters would turn to the Bible to back up their claims. We've looked at the Bible to back up our claims of how to relate to gender. These people, well, colonizers, I won't say these people who go into nations with the intention of colonizing and sharing the gospel in inverted commas, just take that blueprint from the Bible with lack of methodology, with lack of understanding of dispensationalism, and that God is a God who works with people where they are. So thinking of society at the time, at the time of Israel and the surrounding nations, there's a quote where Ellen White speaks of God representing himself as this powerful, strong-armed God, because that's the model that the Israelites had in their mind of who God needed to be. And so at that time, the idea of a God was a conquering, warlike God. And so he kind of like fit that description, but just to get them to the next stage, So it wasn't who he wanted to be. He didn't want to be a colonizer. He didn't want to be a person who says, go and take over these people's land. And that was never who God was. But to use a dirty word, compromised with where the nations were at the time, and with the Israelites. So, yeah, I think that answers my question.
Exactly, and I think that's what I was getting partially from last week's discussion about racism. There was I was really just struggling with, well, how can people do this, and what's their motivation, and then I traced, as we talked, we were tracing it back, and I was thinking, you know what, their motivation was biblical Christianity, which was scary, because they, as you say, God says, go in there, extend your influence in the Old Testament, and take over these lands, get out all these Hittites, Amorites, etc., as Daisy said, genocide, and live peaceably in the land, take it over, get the resources of Canaan, the milk and honey, and make it yours, and make it glorious for God. And that's how we see that Old Testament now, and I think we're recognising it's written by people who, in a racist, sexist culture, patriarchal society. The whole thing is a sinful distortion of how God is at every level. So every age of Christianity, God's trying to restore who he is, and at every age they're making mistakes continually, because Satan's in there to muddy the waters. And so, but I want us to see this is the human condition. It's been down from time, this whole desire to take over and have dominion. It's Alexander the Great, it's the world empires over from the beginning, which said, I've got to go in there and make this my own, and be successful and prosperous in this place, and take over these other people and kill them because they won't let me. And so that's the sinful model, that you have to war like Alexander the Great, go in and do it with war because they're not going to let me do it peaceably. And then we kind of change tactics now, and then we have missions, and we're going to go and do it peacefully now as Christians, and it still doesn't work because of the sinful heart that wants to have everything for themselves. Selfishness is at the root of a lot of the problem, and so we can't solve that unless people are converted. But they're mixed together all the way along the line. Is this picture of how God wants it done, how does he want the work done, and they fail because we know he originally didn't want them to go in and fight. He was going to send hornets in. He was going to sort the problem out for them, in that sense, it seems, without all that military warfare, if they had been faithful. But every stage we just see God's people not being faithful, and then his plans are thwarted and he's misinterpreted. So we see him in this, like we said, isn't that how God is? He wants genocide, and he kind of, gets the Israelites to be the greatest. And so you can see at every stage people justifying their actions by saying, well, God says it's okay to have a slave, and it's okay to make other nations their slaves, because the Israelites said all these Gentiles can be slaves, but you can't make an Israelite a slave. So then the English or the Dutch or whoever have that when they go into Africa. They go, well, we can just make these people slaves. Without even consciously thinking that, it's in there that it's okay to do that. And even God says that's okay to do that. So we can make these people less than and these people on top. And then we can just get on with our business. And so they're seen as a economic, commodity, as opposed to a person. Dehumanise them. The black slaves, for instance, just like gold and diamonds, we're just getting wealth out of this system for to line our own pockets. But I think the scary thing was it's rooted in the Bible. A lot of this justification, it's rooted in how we see God and what He did. But go on.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think what I'm seeing here is the difference between a mission and a colonization is that the mission goes in to benefit that society. So when you think about people like Paul, he'd go and do his own, he'd go and make his own tents. He'd go and, he'd kind of support himself, but he's benefiting the society. But colonization is more, we're going to do the same things, but we want to benefit out of it, and particularly at the cost of where we're with colonize. And it's interesting that when you look at the kingdoms of Bible prophecy, we see that's what all the pagan nations did. They went in and they just go and they have an outright colony. So that the Babylonians would come and put taxes upon the Israelites, and it wasn't hidden. It was just like, we're the power, we've colonized you, you need to pay us tax or perish. You're there to support us. And when you look at the papacy is more or less the continuation of those, but now kind of baptized. It's paganism baptized.
Right.
So, like the early Christians and people like the Waldensians, they would go into like universities and places like that at the risk of their own lives to try and benefit the people there. But I was just thinking about, maybe a lot of this stems from, the papacy. When I look at the effects of the 1260, the reign of the papacy, they now took those same principles of paganism and just baptized them. So we talk about the churchy stuff. So we talk about the idols or this, or they just took all those different gods and just made them into saints or whatever. But I think there might be also a legacy where we look at church and state now, where now when what's his name, that firstborn of the Catholic Church, what's his name again? French guy.
Clovis, yeah. Clovis?
Clovis, yeah. When Clovis is baptized, he's now going to go and force nations to become Catholic. There's a force in there, and it's in the name of Christ. That's what is being used at that time, and this is the effect of the system of the papacy, this church and state, where it's a church, but it's really just wants dominion. So it's using Christianity as it has to frame this ideology that these people are savages, barbarians, and doing all these things. So we have to go and take them over in the name of Christ to do all these things. And that's why you get the Crusades and all those things where people are going in the name of Christ. They're being told, if you go and you kill these people and you take part in the crusade, all these things will be forgiven. That was just a way of getting people to go and do things on behest of the papacy. To give them motivation, they just use the name of Christ to do that. And so some of those ideologies are what have just continued and transpired, in the sense that you're using the name of Christ to go out and do something, but you framed it in a way, just like when we look at the Protestants in our time, the Protestants, they're using the name of Christ to control the state and further their own ends. It's not really about Christ. It's almost like a form without the spirit. And it's the same thing that happened in the time of Christ. They're using the name of God. The Jews are using the name of God that was their reason to oppress people. That was their reason to make separation between them and the Gentiles. So it's just quite interesting that it's a, in terms of the states anyway before, it was an outright oppression, outright colonization, where they'll come in, we're taking over your land, we just want to do all those things. But then now it's in the name of Christ since the time of the papacy, because the papacy just continues that, but it's baptized into Christianity, and that's one of the spirits that Protestants have continued going over to these different places in the name of Christ to colonize.
Definitely.
Emma,
Go on, Natalie. Yes.
I found it interesting what the Pope said this week, or was it just last week? He said, we are sorry about the indigenous people, children in Canada. They were murdered in the name of God by Catholics. It was Catholic school, wasn't it? So I found that interesting, the things what Tom was saying.
That he actually acknowledged that, yeah. In the sense of, I had a thought then as well when you were talking about the papacy. So essentially, the Protestants today are using the same tactics as the papacy, that we want to force people to accept our religion, but it doesn't look like force. It looks like it's a good thing because we're promoting God in the schools, in the government. The principles are good. We want to promote the principles of Christianity. But it's just a subtle way of doing the same thing. So now we're not using physical, literal warfare to do this, like the papacy did. It's not so physical. It's interesting. It's moved into an ideology, really. It's moved into a more spiritual battle, because, of course, they are physically wanting positions in government, but it doesn't look the same. It's a bit like this. It's changed from people moving there physically and doing things physically, although military force is physical. But I think it's an ideology it's the spirit of the papacy, which is this church and state coming together to force people. So the root of it is choice and force and serving others or serving self. And that's the issue with all of it. And it leads me into what I wanted to talk about today, which is dominionism. And I know I've used this word before, but this is where the Christians are at today. And I thought it was interesting that colonization is just practicing domination involving the subjugation of one people over another. So the one people group wants to be dominant over another one. And in that sense, their colonization, as we see, there is always a positive argument you can use as to why that's a good thing. But we know it's negative. We know it's negative to go in and force anybody and take over something from someone else that they already have. It's thieving, it's stealing, it's force and oppression is what it leads to. But at the same time, they've got arguments to justify that we're going to benefit these people, we're going to benefit the country, the situation. But at the root of a lot of all this is this desire for wealth and greed and power. And just before we moved from Cecil Rhodes, I thought it was very interesting that the argument now over this statue is, it's very interesting how these students are lobbying to say remove it. Even 150 lecturers have gone on strike to remove this statue because of what it stands for, because it stands for supporting slavery, to saying it's okay to be a white supremacist who has slaves. And I'm thinking, why would they not want to remove it? And then I read the article further, and one of the reasons is because they have big donors right now who donate money to Oriel College, hundreds of thousands of pounds, and they're saying, if you remove this statue, we'll remove our support from donating to your college. And so I'm saying right there's an economic reason why they don't want to remove this statue. They're over a barrel economically, as opposed to standing for principle and standing for what's right with equality and with how we treat human beings. It's about money. So it goes back to money and power again. And obviously, presumably the people that are donating that money are white and supreme, and they don't care about the fact that Cecil Rhodes built his fortune on slavery. But yeah, I thought it was very interesting that it boils down to money as to why they don't want to remove it, really. And there's arguments like, oh, it'll damage, this is not going to be easy to remove, it's stone, it's going to leave a big hole. And, so what I say is kind of like surface arguments, but the root of that is the fact they're going to lose funding if they take it away.
And if you go back to the reality of slavery, it's a black man that sold a black man to a white man.
Right.
I think we were just discussing this the other day, and that's the really, and that was because of money too.
Exactly. So at the root of all this,
really sad bit of it all.
So perhaps we could say the root of racism and sexism, or the root of a lot of this, is greed and economic prosperity. We want money. And that's where it ties in almost like the love of money is the root of all evil, because what drives people to treat fellow human beings in that way is the love of money, is the love to get more than my neighbour, is that selfish grasping spirit which says, I'm going to lose out if I let you have some, because I won't get enough for me, or I won't have enough, or I won't have more than you, which is what I want.
There's people in Cornwall who live there, and they've had to do a 40-mile round trip because of the meeting that's there this weekend. the people who own 40% of the world's economy.
Oh, the G7 summit.
G7.
Okay. So they've
Yeah,
got
so
leaders of
they
the world
had
there.
to do a 40-mile round trip, and they even live there.
Wow.
No detour.
So go on.
Also, just to mention, I was watching a documentary yesterday about this, interestingly enough, and from what the documentary was saying was that the race issue came a bit later on in terms of, so they, when European settlers came over to Africa, it was kind of like this whole trade thing, like everyone was kind of winning.
Exactly.
And I think it even became, I don't know what the word is, it became like this competitive thing, as in people would actually, capturing slaves would be a motivation of war instead of being, does that make sense?
Yeah, so it's just the so when the Europeans first came to Africa, it's not that they were against black people, they weren't racist to black people. They just couldn't get the labor that they needed from any other place. So the only place that was willing to sell them slaves was Africa, the West Africans. So they didn't actually have a problem. They weren't like, oh, let's go get the black people. They're like, we need labor. The Indians are dying. The South Americans, they're not compliant. So they were just literally doing it out of trade. And so they went to the West Africa where the West Africans enslaved each other anyway.
Right.
Yeah, and they sold the slaves that they had. But because that was so prosperous, they started now warring against each other. The nations and tribes started warring against each other to capture slaves so that they could sell each other to the Europeans who were coming. So it's almost like, at first they're selling their own slaves, who they had anyway, who were slaves anyway. But then it became so lucrative to them because they were getting such benefits like firearms and other things. They started now actually fighting each other and competing against each other to sell more slaves than the neighboring countries and neighboring people, because by selling more slaves you get more prosperity, more economic prosperity. You grow stronger than your neighbors because you have all this trade. So they were doing that, and then what happened later is just to stop.
Okay, sorry, this is where I come in. So
Go.
the reason why it became a racial thing, because now people had to justify why they had slaves, especially being Christian, where it speaks about freedom and equality for all.
Right.
So they had to make it a racial thing by basically saying that, okay, the blacks are technically not human or they're inferior, and that's what allowed them to bring race into it to justify their own actions. So the motivation wasn't always race. But I just find that very interesting,
Right,
because now
yeah.
it becomes this biblical argument that it becomes a reason to justify it now. And unfortunately, obviously this thing's been perpetuated even into our day, this whole racial thing now.
Right. So if you know the roots of that, surely it would help now a black person to not hate a white person as much, or a white person to see that actually maybe there's I don't know, I was just thinking when you were saying that, how is that not understandable then? Some white people would have gone there, say a missionary went there and was horrified that they're treating these black people like that, and they're behaving like savages, treating another black person like a slave who isn't human. And then these are blacks doing it to blacks. So maybe there's some justification for saying these people were savages. You know how things just get blown out of proportion, and somebody says that about a situation like maybe that situation in West Africa where they are treating them like savage, like they're behaving savagely, animalistic, the way they're treating their fellow brothers and sisters, and then that gets blown out of proportion and used now as a weapon,
Like Rwanda.
as a race argument, like Rwanda. Okay, you're breaking up, Richard. So yeah, because there's race against race, and it reminds me, one of the positive things they said about this was it got tribes to work together. So you've got a situation in Africa where there's tribal warfare all the time, like Rwanda. So they've got this Tutsi tribe against the Tutsi tribe. There's so much tribal warfare. Ethiopia, there's so many different tribes, different languages, different everything, that they got tribes to work together when they went.
But the Pope apologised for the nuns and Catholic priests' involvement in that.
Yeah, okay, that's a separate issue. So, yeah.
5 minutes, unless you want more time.
I might want. Can we have more time? 10 minutes?
You can go up to 2 if you want to.
I don't know if I want to wear out everybody with that. It's up to everyone else. It's up to you. But we'll stop. I think probably stop at 1:45 maximum, so 15 minutes. If that's all right.
Yeah, that's fine.
So that the point. So it got tribes to work together, and they saw that as a positive thing. That it broke down some of the barriers between those tribes, and then you can see the logic of teaching everyone the same language. So like now, let's go in and make these people speak English. It was the fact that they all speak different languages anyway. How can we get them to communicate better? So behind everything there could be a positive or a negative motive, but what we do is now we negativize everything and make it racial, as Daisy's kind of pointing out. Maybe it's become that argument. It's become a weapon now, and it's similar to what we see them doing with abortion. It's becoming a political weapon. And if we can see that it's not perhaps just about the racism, there's deeper roots than that. There's this love of money. There's this. They were doing it anyway, so they could justify, well, these people were slaves in Africa. We're not doing anything different than the Africans were already doing to them. So you can see the white people are saying, well, they were already slaves. We're just bringing them over here and doing the same thing with them as they were already done with. Now, that's not to justify it was right, but you can see how they could use these arguments to justify what they're doing. And maybe it doesn't look so inhumane and so ugly if you understand some of the motives they had or some of the situation they're in. And that's not to justify it today, obviously, because dispensations require different behaviour, and we've got light and understanding of the Bible now in a way that people didn't even then, or people didn't have that full clarity. So we've got to see that progression in there. But I think it really does help to see the roots of it, as you're saying, to understand where people were coming from, and what their culture was, what the situation was that justified that kind of behaviour, which to us seems so obnoxious now, and is obviously obnoxious, but it's all part of the sin problem that's being perpetuated. And so I think in the light of that, the reason now we can see that this dominionism theology comes out is because we see in this explosion of immorality, or seeming immorality in society, what people see as anti-godlike behaviour, say somewhere like America, and how they've interpreted the Bible, sexist, racist, etc. So the whole fact that women are now getting more power in the 1950s, 60s, or black people are rising up into the civil rights movement, this threat, as I think Elder Tess has said, the perceived threat changes through history. So they make a big mountain out of the threat, which makes people rally up and support a cause. And this dominionism theology comes out at that time period in 1950s, when things are unsettled in America, and they're looking at, but it's the same principle of domination, that bringing people under subjection, even though they didn't paint it like that, this theology, this right-wing theology comes out basically saying we have to protect Christianity and the rights of Christians. We have to protect white people, basically, because of that. I don't think they phrased it as a white argument, but it ends up being a white argument. They start homeschooling to instill Christian principles in our children, because the state schools are failing. So they're big on homeschooling. They're big on the fact that we need to get into government to change things, because the only way you can change a nation is through its government, which is a good principle in one way or another. This is the way to do it peaceably. We're not going to go in there and take up arms and force people to change and make them do what we want. We're going to go in through the government and do it democratically. So if most people want this, let's do it that way. And so you can see why the Christians are now motivated to get involved in government, because they want to change things. Was that?
Their ideology.
Their ideology, yeah, which is pushing them, based on their understanding of the Bible as well, that we should teach people how to be Christians. We should encourage them in that direction. And so when we first hear these arguments about them putting "In God We Trust" on the walls, as a conservative Christian, I'm going, well, that's good, isn't it? Put the Ten Commandments in the schools. Educate people on who God is. Give them a book. Give them make them see it our way. And we don't see that as force, but we know that when church and state come together, it becomes force, because it becomes legislated. Now it's going to be law that people have to do things this way, a certain way. And I think if we understand that this is the history of all this and tie it in with Christianity, it's not so alien that this is what white Christians now are pushing for. Is this what their understanding of the Bible is, and putting it into practice? And where I was going to go with that as well was looking at the time of Christ, because I think it really, we know that's the history of success, but we see how the disciples saw this whole thing. And I wanted to look at this passages from, we've got 10 minutes left, so we'll start looking at this. I think I've only got 2 passages anyway, from Desire of Ages 3:7-7. And I want us to see that the disciples were no different from the Millerites, and they're no different from apostate Protestants today, basically, in their attitude to what they want to see and what they're expecting. So this dominionism is basically, the definition of it is the sovereignty or control. If you have dominion, you have sovereignty or control over a place or a nation, and it means dominating, being superior, having the supremacy. All those words are connected with dominionism, which is in our time Christian nationalism. So we are nationalistic, we're political, but we're Christian with it. So we're American, but we're American Christians, and we want to Christianize America. And that's at the root of this dominion theology, is we want to Christianize, we want to get people into the workplace, the business place, the schools, the education, those 7 areas, and have dominion. So dominion theology is a group of Christians with political ideology that seek to institute a nation governed by Christians based on their understanding of biblical law. So they want to enforce Bible principles through law and their interpretation of the Bible, which is why it's dangerous, because they're not using the right methodology to understand the Bible necessarily. So if we go to Desire of Ages 377.2, and this is what's going through the minds and hearts of the disciples. So the context of this passage, it's the 2nd paragraph in the chapter, which is entitled, I'll post it in the chat, A Night on the Lake. It's chapter 40 of Desire of Ages. Now chapter 39 is Give Ye Them to Eat. So this is the feeding of the 5,000. So Christ has just fed 5,000 men and all the children and women as well. So we don't know how many, but it was probably double that at least. And then we're going to move to the end of the day, and this is what's going on in the hearts of the disciples and the people. So the disciples and the people are on the same page. They want to see Christ as this deliverer. They want him to come and have dominion, basically. So this paragraph, it says, all day the conviction has strengthened. That crowning act is assurance that the long-looked-for deliverer is among them. The hopes of the people rise higher and higher. This is he who will make Judea an earthly paradise, a land flowing with milk and honey. He can satisfy every desire. He can break the power of the hated Romans. He can deliver Judah and Jerusalem. He can heal the soldiers who are wounded in battle. He can supply whole armies with food. He can conquer the nations and give to Israel the long-sought dominion. So, Sister Debbie, it says all day the conviction has strengthened. What's this conviction that they've got? From the whole paragraph, you can just pull out what you're getting from that. What conviction? It says all day this conviction has strengthened. What are they convicted about?
About the crowning act, the deliverer.
So what's this crowning act that he's done? Is that? Go on.
Sorry, go on.
So what's the crowning act first of all?
The long-for deliverer, that they think it's him, right? Well, it is, but it's not going to come in the way that they want.
So what?
He will make Judea an earthly paradise. So they're looking to make it an earthly paradise.
Okay, so go back to the crowning act. What does crowning mean?
Crowning. Well,
So this is something he's done, the act.
yeah.
What's the crowning? If it's the crowning act, it's like the crown is on top of the king's head. It shows his dominion over the kingdom. It's like the most important. Who's the most important person in the kingdom?
Well, the deliverer, isn't it?
No, in a kingdom, it's the one that wears the crown.
The king.
It's the king. So this crowning act is the one that's got the crown, the most important act that he's done so far. What are they saying it is in this passage? What?
Deliverer up there.
No. What's the crowning act? What's the most important thing?
The crowning act is assurance that the long-for deliverer is among them. That he'll make.
It doesn't say in the passage what the crowning act is, but I gave you the context of this story. So what's the context of this story? So the crowning act means the most important thing he's done so far. That crowning act. So it's something Jesus has done. What's that crowning act? That's strengthened this conviction. They've got this conviction. All day this conviction has strengthened. That crowning act is their assurance, is the evidence, is their that he's the deliverer. But what's the crowning act he's done to give them that assurance? All day they're being strengthened.
Are you talking about what he did before?
What's he just done in the previous chapter?
No, he just gave them, take the whole 5,000, didn't they?
Yeah, so he's fed 5,000. He's fed all these people with that food. He's worked this massive miracle, and in their heads, it's so literal and physical and visible. They're totally taken up by this, and it's just strengthened their conviction. So what's the conviction that's strengthened?
Acts again, the crowning act.
So what? Sorry, what's the crowning act then? What's the crowning act? Just to solidify that.
Well, they think he's going to deliver them, doesn't he? I mean, he's going to deliver them from the Romans.
Yeah, but
here he can break the power of the hated Romans.
okay, don't go ahead. I know you said you could use the whole paragraph. I did say you could use the whole paragraph, but let's start. Just stay with the first two sentences, all day the conviction is strengthened. All day he's been teaching and he's been feeding now the 5,000. That crowning act. So they have this conviction already that this man is special. There's something about him. That crowning act is assurance that the long looked for deliverer is among them. So they've got this assurance now that he's important because of this crowning act. What was the crowning act?
The feeding of the 5,000.
The feeding of the 5,000. So he's worked this literal miracle to feed all these people from 5 loaves and 2 fishes, and this is like, wow, temporal prosperity. If he can feed people, we can overcome famine, which is one of the curses of the Old Testament. If you're not faithful, you're going to have a famine. It says in the paragraph that he can supply whole armies with food, so you're never going to starve. So this crowning act assures them now, this must be the deliverer. Look, if someone who could do this can have dominion over everyone, because he can provide those necessities that everybody needs. Did you have anything to add? No. Does anybody else want to comment on that first bit?
Which first?
The first
Yeah.
two sentences. All day the conviction is strengthened. That crowning act is assurance that the long looked for deliverer is among them.
Yeah, got 4.
So
That he can satisfy every desire.
he can satisfy every desire. Well, every physical desire. Okay, so
Yeah.
Brother Leon has a thought. Oh, sorry.
False understanding of prophecy was finally going to be fulfilled.
Right, so their false understanding, the Apis bull king that they're looking for, this warrior king, is
Yes.
by his actions now, he's confirming that's the kind of king he's going to be. So Brother Leon had a point.
Yeah, if you notice, they start claiming all these promises based upon this false idea or this false understanding of of who Jesus is and his mission. So the claiming is justifiable promises. They are justifiable. If you read the promises, I think it's promises that we'll claim today as well.
Yeah.
They are good promises, and so the claiming his promises now with this strength and belief. This crowning act.
Are them promises
This.
the same though
So-
when you
but-
use parable methodology?
Right, so are the promises the same when you use parable methodology?
So sorry, let me finish. Sorry.
Let finish. Let
Go on, Emma.
Oh, okay.
So what I'm saying is,
Can you hear Leon? Carry on.
oh, can they even hear me?
Yes.
Yes, go on.
Oh, yeah. So the claim, they got this in this deed of Christ, and they're saying yes, okay, this confirms what we've already believed. This is confirmed what we studied. So now we can claim this promise with assurance that yes, okay, what we need, he can provide. Provide the armors of food, protection, or whatever we need. Is just confirmed that he can do it. So now, let's proclaim him as king. This is what they wanted. So basically, the disciples and the Jews are all on the same mindset, basically, and this is why Jesus sends them away to pray alone. They're on the same mindset, and now the disciples are claiming his promises the wrong way. That's all I'm saying.
So here, I think one of the key words for me in the two sentences on from that, when it says the hopes of the people rise higher and higher. So they've all got this false hope that he's going to deliver them from the Romans, basically. And this is what their long looked for deliverer is among them. That's what it means to them. It's not about deliverance from sin, it's deliverance from the Romans. And this is he who will make Judea an earthly paradise. And this is their focus, this earthly paradise. So that's where they're tripping up. So every promise now, as it says, it's going to make Judah a land flowing with milk and honey. He's going to satisfy every desire, and this for them is primarily physical. We're going to get food on our tables. We're going to break the power of the hated Romans. We're not going to be slaves to these people anymore. He's going to deliver us out of their hands. Israel can be great. He can supply whole armies with food, which means they'll never lose a battle. And also, he's already resurrected the widow's son at Nain. I'm not sure if he's done Lazarus yet, but they know that he can make them come alive, so no one's going to die in battle. He can conquer the nations and give to Israel this long sought for dominion. Yeah, prosperity gospel, which is basically what this is. But the root of that is this desire for that we're special, that we are going to be blessed physically with these things. And we believe that as Christians. We believe that God will open the windows of heaven for us, that he will get the sunshine on our crops, that we'll have the best and biggest, of everything. We think that God can do that for us, and we want him to do that for us, and we see ourselves as elite forces to do that with, that we deserve it as Christians. And I think that's the root of white supremacy, dominionism, is this inbuilt, thing that we're special, that we are set apart. And even when we read verses like, a holy priesthood, a peculiar people, a nation, the way that an Israelite read that was in this context was that we're the best, we're the supreme, we're going to take over the world and have dominion. And that's rooted in every generation of Christians, and it's just coming down now into apostate Protestantism, which is God wants us to have prosperity, he wants us to have success, and although we may not interpret it exactly the same as an apostate Protestant, that's where we've come from. We're not saying we should have physical riches necessarily, but we've still got this idea that we're special, we're prosperous, but that idea of being a holy priesthood, God wanted everyone in the world to have that access to that. He wanted an Amorite, a Canaanite, he wanted all of them to be part of that holy priesthood. He wants the whole world, because earth is his crowning act. Human beings are his crowning act of creation, so every human being should have that privilege of being a priest right now. And look how many priests there are in the world, in this movement. But every single human being should be a priest on that as an example to the universe. So when we look at it on those broad terms, that promise isn't just for us as priests in the movement. You're a holy priesthood, a peculiar nation. It was for everyone who could have access to that promise. But they want to make these promises exclusively for them, and at the expense of everyone else. And that's what I think we do as well, a little bit. So a little bit, I like to say a little bit, because we don't want to see ourselves as bad as the Israelites or as bad as anybody else, but we're just as bad, and we just have the same kind of mindset that he's going to answer our prayers over other people's, that we are special in God's eyes compared to the next person or our neighbour. And I think we have to get rid of those thoughts and see that this Bible is for everyone, access for everyone, equality.
Yeah, another thought is
we'll
like,
wrap up in a minute because it's 48.
oh yeah, the time.
Yeah.
It says, that long, so what does it say when it says longed for?
He can conquer the nations and give to Israel the long-sought dominion.
So this
long-sought.
when something's long sought, that means it's something deep rooted in your heart. That
Cherish.
long sought things are not easy to let go of. You can't just let go of something so what you're longing for years or your life actually. For all the Jews' life, they've been longing for this, so it's not something they can just give up overnight, or maybe in 3.5 years in the disciples' case. So yeah, so when this long sought things come now, when you see it being confirmed, then yeah, it makes sense. Okay, let's make him king now. This is the opportunity. Let's get him. Let's make him king now, because he can. It's come, but basically the promise has come. It's here. The deliverer is here. Let's make the most of this time, and yeah. So yeah, so something long for, it's not easy to kind of get rid of. So this is Christ's work that he was trying to do, and I see why it was a struggle. But this way it took more than 3.5 years, because it was something so deep rooted within the heart that, yeah.
And I used to ask the question, why does, for instance, why does he come into Jerusalem on a donkey when he knows the promise says that a king will come on a colt, and everybody's expecting a king to come on a donkey? And so this sets them up to think he must be the king. But the problem you've got is that everything Christ does, because you could say, why did he feed 5,000 people knowing that they would do this? But everything Christ does is he's limited in what he can do, because everything he does is going to be misinterpreted and misunderstood. And so he has to try and do the things that need to be done, but put the right slant on them. So we'd have to find a reason. Why does he do this? Why does he feed the 5,000 when the whole thing just buys into temporal prosperity and this is what they use it for, and this is what they justify their actions for now. Like, and the frustration of the disciples now, because he's got popular support, he's got all these 5,000 people on his side now because he's just fed them, and the disciples are like, this is prime time to say, let's take the kingdom, let's do it. And so you can see in their heads, they've gone after it for so long. They've been following him because they want to be on the right, sit on the thrones of Israel with him. And here he is saying, no, don't do this now, go away. And when we see why he does that, which we're not going to get to today, but we'll pick that up next time, is he doesn't allow them to do that because it would have led to violence and insurrection and the total opposite of what he was coming to do, his kingdom to be set up in the right way. I think it's fascinating, the whole passage, when you read on why he didn't do that, why he doesn't let them proclaim him king at that point. Go on.
So do you think that the Jews wanted to colonize the Romans just the way, the same thing, like the different colonials tried to colonize other people?
That you could say they just wanted to take their country back. You could justify, you could look at it in a positive light, that they've been taken over by these people. Why should the Romans be dominating Israel? Israel should be for the Israelis. So we want Israel back. And in their minds that was justifiable. This is the glorious land, it belongs to us. Why are you here? You need to get out. But so they're no different from humanity down through the ages. They just want their country and they're preserving their own interests. But they think that that's justifiable because this is God's kingdom and he's going to make us great. And that mindset is being there from the beginning of the Bible, that Israelites are the best and the Gentiles are less than. And this is the mindset that still carries on in the Protestants today. We're Protestants. America is Protestant. It's meant to be for God. And this is what it's going to look like. We need to uphold God's principles. And the fact that we don't fully understand those principles and we don't understand who God is, just like the disciples, means we're going to mess it up if we do that. We're going to mess it up. And so the disciples, if they'd been given that power then, they would have messed it up because they're still racist, sexist, homophobic. Is what?
LGBTness.
Yeah, they've still got the wrong understanding of who God is and how to treat their fellow men. So they'd have got into a position of power and they would have stamped on everyone like the Romans stamped on them. They'd have just done back what's been done to them. And their mindset's not changed, their heart's not changed, which is what he came to do. So he's trying constantly to show them this is what you need. You need a heart change. To make any lasting change in lives of people, you need to love them into the kingdom, not force them. So, and that's our issue, that a lot of the ways we've done evangelism, a lot of the ways we've functioned as conservative is a force religion. It's not loving them into the kingdom and meeting them where their needs are. And we haven't seen that we've not done that. We've thought we were doing a good work, just like the disciples. We're doing a good work. We're selling someone a book that they don't need and they can't read properly. Sorry. It's like, it's just doing more harm than good. We're going to sell them a book that's written 200 years ago and they need it because they need the great controversy. And now we're recognising, actually, we're just going to create people in our image that are going to have the same mistakes and make the same, don't understand how to read the Bible. So, yeah, I think it should open our eyes to the fact that we're in the same condition as the disciples. We're in the same condition as even people who used to go and colonise, perhaps, which is just sad. But if we understand where that's all come from and this mix of a wrong interpretation of the Bible and the damage it's done to justify slavery, to justify wrong actions, even now in America, it's frightening that we were reading the Bible in the same way and we're trying to come out of that. So by God's grace, this message truly is liberating and truly is teaching us how to love our neighbour, which at the root of it we really don't want to do because we think we're going to lose out doing that, and it's not about preserving me, it's about giving to others, and that's quite hard to do because we naturally want self-preservation. So yeah, so let's pray to close. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this message. We little understand the impact that it's having on our own lives, let alone the impact it could have on the world if people really understood how to read your word, how to understand you, Lord, how to really understand these parables that you have given us and not to do this literal reading of the scripture to justify oppression of our fellow human beings. We have seen down through the ages how religion has been mixed with politics, how economics and religion have gone together to the detriment of people and to the oppression and slavery of races and groups, and how guilty all of us are in promoting a wrong picture of who you are, of not understanding who you are. Help us, Lord, to come fully out of this darkness in our dispensation, to really have a understanding of who you are and what you want us to do at this time. We recognise that it's an individual work. It's always been a work about individuals and the value of one soul, that we cannot overthrow governments, that we cannot change the world, that we cannot change groups of people's mindsets. We can't force people to read books and become Christians, but we can make a difference in our sphere. We can sow seeds of life and health with people that will set them free. Help us to do that work, Lord. Help us to make a difference one-on-one with those that we interact with, to see the value of the one soul at work or in the shops or in our families that we can work with. Give us that spirit of self-sacrifice that will look after the interests of others before ourselves. Please be with us now and guide us as we continue in this Sabbath hours. May you bless us and draw us all closer to you and to each other is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.